Commander Lee Jun looked through the viewport as the diplomatic shuttle made its final approach to Neloria. The alien planet's surface glowed with a soft blue-green hue, vast oceans reflecting the light of its twin suns. After 3 months in deep space, they had finally arrived at humanity's most important first contact mission. "Final approach sequence initiated," announced the pilot. "Landing in 5 minutes, Commander." Lee nodded, straightening his formal diplomatic uniform. Earth's resources were dwindling, and the Nelorians possessed both advanced technology and abundant minerals that humanity desperately needed. The success or failure of this mission would impact billions of lives back home. "Remember your training," said Kim Sun, his cultural advisor. "The Nelorians value directness and honesty above all else." "I've reviewed the briefings dozens of times," Lee assured her. "Their society operates on principles of communal benefit and resource sharing. Technologically advanced, but with different social structures than Earth." What the briefings hadn't mentioned was exactly what he was about to discover. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud. Lee took a deep breath as the airlock cycled, confirming the atmosphere was safe for humans. The doors slid open, revealing the alien landscape. The spaceport was a marvel of engineering. Crystalline structures that seemed to grow organically from the ground, gleaming under the twin suns. Lee stepped onto Nelorian soil, the first human diplomat to do so. A delegation waited at the bottom of the shuttle ramp. Lee had seen images of the insectoid species, but seeing them in person was another experience entirely. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with slender bodies covered in iridescent exoskeletons that shifted colors with their movements. Multiple limbs moved with surprising grace, and compound eyes reflected the sunlight. What Lee hadn't expected was their complete lack of clothing. He froze momentarily, caught off guard. The briefings had shown images of Nelorians, but they had been cropped or angled to highlight their faces and technology. No one had mentioned this particular cultural detail. The tallest Nelorian stepped forward. "Commander Lee of Earth, I am Diplomatic Liaison Kang. We welcome you to Neloria." Lee forced himself to maintain eye contact with Kang's 4 compound eyes, fighting the instinct to look away from the unclothed alien body. Their exoskeletons covered their forms like natural armor, with different colored plates that shifted and gleamed in the sunlight. "Thank you for your welcome," Lee managed, bowing slightly. "I bring greetings from Earth." Kang's antennae twitched, a sign that Lee recognized from his briefings as curiosity. "Your discomfort is evident in your biological responses. Is our meeting area unsuitable?" Lee realized his heart rate, and breathing had quickened, details the Nelorians could apparently detect. Their senses were more acute than humans had realized. "I apologize," Lee said carefully. "Humans have different customs regarding bodily presentation. I'm adjusting to the cultural difference." Kang's head tilted. "Ah. You refer to our natural state. Your species covers itself with artificial materials. We have studied this but find it difficult to understand the purpose." One of the other Nelorians stepped forward, its exoskeleton displaying patterns of deep blue and green. "Perhaps the human requires covering for protection. Their skin appears fragile." "Partly," Lee acknowledged, grateful for the diplomatic opening. "Our bodies lack your natural armor. But it's also a deeply ingrained cultural practice with many meanings and purposes." Kang's mandibles clicked together in what Lee recognized as their version of thoughtful consideration. "Fascinating. Cultural rituals often outlive their practical origins. We have many such traditions ourselves." The tension eased slightly as Lee realized the Nelorians weren't offended by his reaction. They were genuinely curious. This was, after all, why he had come, to understand differences and build bridges. "The High Council awaits your arrival," Kang said, gesturing toward a gleaming structure in the distance. "We have prepared human-suitable accommodations based on the information provided by your advance team." The delegation led Lee toward a vehicle that hovered slightly above the ground. As they moved through the spaceport, Lee noticed other Nelorians stopping to observe him. Their exoskeletons displayed rapid color changes, a form of communication, he recalled from the briefings. They are curious about your coverings, Kang explained, noticing Li's observation. Many have never seen a human before. Inside the transport vehicle, Li found seats modified to accommodate human anatomy. As they glided toward the city center, Kang explained various landmarks they passed. Li tried to focus on the information, but found his attention continually drawn to the alien physiology of his hosts. Our exoskeletons provide all the protection we need, Kang explained, correctly interpreting Li's distraction. They regulate temperature, resist damage, and display our social status and emotional states through color shifts. Is this why humans use coverings? To display status? Sometimes, Li admitted. Clothing serves many purposes for us. Protection, social signaling, personal expression, modesty. Modesty. Kang's antennae quivered. This concept does not translate well. Li searched for words to explain a concept so basic to human society, yet evidently alien to the Nilorians. It relates to privacy of the body. In human culture, certain body parts are considered private, to be seen only in specific contexts. The transport vehicle slowed as they approached an impressive structure that seemed to be made of living crystal. Kang's exoskeleton shifted to a deep purple hue. Perhaps understanding will come with time, Kang said. Your species and mine have much to learn from each other. That is why you are here, yes, to find common ground despite our differences. Li nodded, feeling the new determination. This unexpected cultural gap was exactly why face-to-face diplomacy mattered. Yes, different as we are, I believe we can build something valuable together. As he stepped from the transport, Li realized that his initial shock was already fading. The human capacity to adapt was remarkable, a trait that had carried the species to the stars. Now that same adaptability would be key to forging humanity's most important alien alliance. Li woke in his quarters after his first night on Niloria. The room was designed with human comfort in mind. Temperature, lighting, and even gravity had been adjusted to Earth standards. Yet small details reminded him he was on an alien world. The curved architecture, the faint hum of unfamiliar technology, and the view of twin suns rising through his window. A soft chime announced a visitor. Li quickly dressed in his diplomatic uniform before opening the door. Kang stood outside, exoskeleton gleaming with subtle blue patterns. Good morning, Commander Li. I hope your rest cycle was satisfactory. Very comfortable, thank you, Li replied, still making an effort to maintain eye contact rather than look at Kang's unclothed form. The High Council has arranged a tour of our city today, Kang said. It will help you understand Nilorian culture before formal negotiations begin tomorrow. They walked through corridors that opened onto garden areas where Nilorians went about their daily activities. Li noticed how their exoskeletons changed colors as they interacted, subtle shifts that seemed to convey meaning. Your coverings today are different from yesterday, Kang observed, pointing to Li's uniform. Yes, we change our clothing daily for cleanliness and to suit different occasions. Fascinating. We simply shed our outer layer when needed and grow a new one. It happens 4 times in our life cycle. Kang's antennae twitched. May I ask a personal question? Li nodded. Do you feel trapped inside these coverings? Do they not restrict your movement and sensory input? The question surprised Li. Not at all. We're accustomed to them from birth. They're as natural to us as your exoskeleton is to you. They entered a large open space that appeared to be a market. Nilorians moved between stalls displaying foods, materials, and technological devices. Li noticed that some Nilorians wore decorative items, thin chains, and small jewel-like objects attached to their exoskeletons. You said Nilorians don't wear coverings, but some have decorations, Li observed. Yes. These mark special achievements or family connections, not for hiding, but for displaying information. Kang's exoskeleton brightened. Would you like to try some Nilorian food? We have prepared options safe for human consumption. At a food stall, Li was offered something that looked like blue fruit. He cautiously took a bite, finding it surprisingly pleasant, like a mixture of pear and cinnamon. "This is delicious," he said. The Nilorian vendor's exoskeleton flashed with bright patterns that Lee now recognized as pleasure or pride. Throughout the day, Lee noticed Nilorians watching him with obvious curiosity. Many approached to ask questions about his clothing, Earth, and human customs. Their directness was refreshing, if sometimes uncomfortable. "Why do humans hide their mating characteristics?" one young Nilorian asked bluntly. Lee felt his face grow warm. "That's considered a private topic in our culture." "Private? But it is biology, not a secret," the Nilorian responded, clearly confused. Kang intervened. "Remember our briefing on human social boundaries. Some topics require special conversational context." By afternoon, Lee found himself growing more comfortable with the unclothed Nilorians. Their bodies were so different from humans that the initial shock was fading. Their exoskeletons functioned effectively as both protection and expression. As evening approached, Kang led Lee to a large dome structure. "This is our communal eating hall. The High Council has arranged a welcome feast." Inside, hundreds of Nilorians gathered around low tables. A hush fell as Lee entered, and all compound eyes turned toward him. "They are honored by your presence," Kang explained. "No human has joined us for a communal meal before." Lee was seated at a central table with what appeared to be important Nilorians. Their exoskeletons displayed more elaborate patterns and colors. "This is Sub-Chancellor Park, head of our science division." Kang introduced a Nilorian with striking green patterns. "We are most interested in human technological approaches," Park said. "Your methods are different, but often innovative." The meal began with servers bringing various foods on crystal platters. Lee noticed that as the room warmed from the gathered bodies, he felt uncomfortable in his uniform jacket. Without thinking, he started to remove it. A ripple of color changes swept through the room. Nilorians turned to watch, their antennae quivering with interest. Realizing he had caused a reaction, Lee paused. "Is there a problem?" "Not at all," Kang said quickly. "They are surprised you would remove a covering in public. It is seen as a significant gesture of trust." Lee considered this. He hadn't intended any symbolic meaning, but cultural misunderstandings could work in his favor too. He finished removing his jacket, leaving his uniform shirt on. The Sub-Chancellor's exoskeleton flashed brightly. A gesture of friendship. The human removes a protection layer among us. The room filled with clicking sounds that Lee understood was Nilorian approval. The atmosphere immediately warmed. Later, as various foods were served, Lee struggled with unfamiliar utensils designed for multiple limbs. After several awkward attempts, he put them down and used his hands instead. Another wave of color changes swept the room. "Have I made another mistake?" Lee whispered to Kang. "The opposite. Using your natural tools, your hands, rather than pretending mastery of our eating implements, shows honesty. Nilorians value this highly." The meal continued with increasing comfort. Lee found himself explaining human customs while learning about Nilorian life. He described Earth's changing seasons, family structures, and even fashion trends, a concept that fascinated the Nilorians. As the evening ended, Sub-Chancellor Park approached. "Commander Lee, you have surprised us. We expected more. Difficulty in communication between our species." "Differences don't have to be barriers," Lee replied. "They can be opportunities for growth." Walking back to his quarters, Lee realized he had gone hours without feeling uncomfortable about the Nilorians' unclothed state. Their forms were simply another expression of their nature, as normal to them as clothing was to humans. "Tomorrow we begin formal negotiations," Kang said as they reached Lee's door. "The Council is impressed by your adaptability. It suggests humans may be compatible trading partners despite our differences." Lee smiled. "Cultural immersion works both ways, Kang. I'm learning as much about humans by seeing ourselves through your eyes." That night, Lee made notes in his journal. Day 2 on Niloria. "The most alien thing here might be how quickly the strange becomes familiar." The morning of the formal negotiations arrived with both promise and tension. Lee had spent a week on Niloria, gradually adjusting to Nilorian customs. He dressed in his most formal diplomatic uniform, a crisp blue outfit with Earth's emblem displayed prominently. When Kang arrived to escort him to the council chamber, the Nilorian's exoskeleton displayed unusual patterns, rapid shifts between blue and orange that Lee had learned indicated concern. "Is something wrong?" Lee asked as they walked through the crystal corridors. "The High Council has scheduled the Sacred Trust ceremony before negotiations today," Kang said, antennae twitching nervously. "It is unexpected. What does this ceremony involve?" Lee's diplomatic instincts sensed trouble. "It is an ancient tradition, rarely used with outsiders. Participants show complete trust by removing all barriers between them." Kang's mandibles clicked anxiously. "For Nilorians, we display our innermost exoskeleton colors, which normally remain hidden." Lee stopped walking. "And for humans, the Council expects you will remove your coverings as we remove our protective outer layers. It symbolizes mutual vulnerability and honesty." Lee felt a cold wave of shock. "That's impossible. I can't negotiate naked." "Not naked," Kang corrected. "Natural. As you truly are. Humans don't. We can't." Lee struggled to explain. "Our clothing isn't just physical protection. It's psychological protection, too." Kang's colors dimmed to a troubled gray. "The Council believes if Earth truly seeks alliance, you must demonstrate trust through our traditional methods." They reached the massive doors of the Council chamber where 6 high-ranking Nilorians waited. Their exoskeletons displayed formal patterns in rich purples and deep blues. The head counselor, Min, stepped forward. "Commander Lee of Earth, we welcome you to these historic negotiations." Lee bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Counselor Min. Earth values this opportunity for alliance. Before we begin, we will perform the Sacred Trust ceremony," Min announced. "Please follow Kang to the preparation chamber." Lee felt panic rising but kept his expression neutral. "Counselor, while I deeply respect your traditions, this particular ceremony conflicts with fundamental human customs. Perhaps we could substitute another trust ritual." Min's compound eyes fixed on Lee. "This ceremony has welcomed outsiders into alliance for 20,000 years. It is the foundation of all Nilorian negotiations." "I understand its importance," Lee said carefully. "But humans have biological and cultural needs for bodily privacy that are as fundamental to us as your traditions are to you." The counselors' exoskeletons flickered with rapid color changes as they communicated among themselves. Lee couldn't interpret all the patterns, but tension was obvious. "Your reluctance suggests Earth may not truly seek honest relations," said Min finally. "Perhaps you come with hidden intentions." "Not at all," Lee insisted. "Our intentions are transparent, even if our bodies are not." Kang intervened. "Perhaps, counselors, we should consider that humans experience physical vulnerability differently than Nilorians. Their skin provides no protection." "This is precisely why the ceremony proves trust," countered another counselor named Ja. "One must be willing to show vulnerability to build true alliance." Lee realized this cultural impasse threatened the entire mission. Earth desperately needed this alliance, but he couldn't violate such a fundamental human taboo. "May I suggest a compromise?" Lee offered. "I could remove my outer jacket and shoes as a symbolic gesture. This maintains human dignity while acknowledging your tradition." The council members' colors darkened significantly, a bad sign. Min's voice became formal and cold. "Half measures indicate half trust. The ceremony cannot be modified without losing its meaning." "Then perhaps we are not ready for alliance," Counselor J said firmly. Lee felt the mission collapsing around him. "Please understand, this isn't about deception. Humans simply experience exposure differently." "Different experiences should not prevent understanding," Min replied. "If you cannot participate in our most sacred trust ritual, how can we proceed with sharing resources and technology?" The counselors turned away, moving to a private chamber for discussion. Kang remained with Lee, exoskeleton now a troubled gray color. "This is worse than I anticipated," Kang admitted quietly. The Council sees your refusal as proof humans hide their true nature. We don't hide our nature, Lee argued. We express it differently. Clothing is part of human identity. Kang's antennae drooped. To Nilorians, identity comes from what is revealed, not what is hidden. When the counselors returned, their decision was clear from their dark coloration. Min spoke formally. The council must reconsider whether humans and Nilorians can form meaningful alliance. Negotiations are suspended until tomorrow. As Lee walked back to his quarters, the weight of failure pressed down on him. He had known cultural differences would present challenges, but hadn't anticipated something so fundamental would threaten everything. In his room, he contacted Earth Command through the secure channel. Director Kim's face appeared on the screen, concerned. The negotiations have stalled, Lee explained, detailing the ceremony and the Council's reaction to his refusal. This alliance is critical, Commander, Kim reminded him. Earth's resource shortages grow worse daily. I understand the stakes, Lee replied, but they're asking the impossible. Nothing is impossible when billions of lives depend on your success, Kim said sharply. Find a solution. The transmission ended, leaving Lee alone with the problem. He paced his quarters, seeking an answer that would satisfy both human dignity and Nilorian customs. Later that evening, a chime announced a visitor. Lee opened the door to find Kang alongside another Nilorian he recognized as Ta, a cultural historian he'd met during his tour. We may have found a path forward, Kang said, colors showing cautious optimism. Ta has been researching human concepts of clothing and exposure. Ta stepped forward. Commander, I believe I understand the core issue. To Nilorians, our exoskeletons are both protection and expression. We communicate through color changes. By asking you to remove your coverings, we essentially asked you to remove part of your communication system. Lee blinked in surprise. That's remarkably insightful. The misunderstanding is mutual, Tai continued. We perceive your clothing as concealment because for us, concealment means suppressing our natural color patterns, which we only do when being deceptive. How does this help us? Lee asked. Kang's colors brightened. It gives us a new way to explain your position to the Council, not as refusal, but as a different form of honesty. For the first time since the disastrous meeting, Lee felt hope. Do you think they'll listen? Perhaps, Kang said, but we may need more than just explanation. We need an alternative that honors both traditions. As the three discussed possibilities late into the night, an idea began to form, one that might bridge the seemingly impassable cultural gap between humanity and their potential alien allies. Lee sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the communication device from Earth. The message from Director Kim had been clear. Failure was not an option. Earth needed this alliance. Millions of lives depended on him finding a solution to this cultural impasse. There must be a way, he muttered, running his hands through his hair. The core issue seemed impossible to resolve. Nilorians valued physical transparency as the foundation of trust. Humans required bodily privacy as a fundamental need. These values appeared completely opposed. Lee picked up his tablet and began reviewing everything he knew about Nilorian culture. Their exoskeletons served multiple purposes: protection, temperature regulation, and communication through color changes. The colors were not decorative but functional. They conveyed emotions, status, and intentions. An idea began to form in his mind. He opened a communication line to the Earth ship orbiting Niloria. This is Commander Lee. I need to speak with Chief Engineer Choi immediately. Within minutes, Choi's face appeared on the screen. Commander, what can I do for you? For the next several hours, Lee discussed terms of alliance with the Council. His transparency suit continued to display his genuine reactions, excitement when discussing scientific exchange, concern when addressing resource limitations, determination when working through difficult points. The Nilorians responded to this new form of communication with increasing comfort. They could read his emotional responses directly, building trust that transcended words. By evening, They had established the framework for an alliance that would benefit both species. As the session ended, Counselor Min approached Lee again. "Your innovative solution has done more than save these negotiations," she said. "It has taught us something about humans we did not expect." "What's that?" Lee asked. "That you can transform barriers into bridges," Min replied, her exoskeleton glowing with warm colors. "This is a valuable trait in the universe." As Lee walked back to his quarters with Kang, the Nilorian's colors displayed clear admiration. "The transparency suit will become legendary in Nilorian history," Kang said. "A perfect example of finding harmony between different ways of being." Lee smiled. Sometimes the best solutions aren't about choosing one way or another, but creating something entirely new. That night, Lee sent a message to Earth. Alliance negotiations proceeding successfully. Human innovation has once again opened doors that seemed permanently closed. 3 weeks after the breakthrough with the transparency suit, Lee stood in the Grand Hall of Niloria. The massive crystal chamber sparkled under the light of the twin suns streaming through the ceiling. Hundreds of Nilorians filled the space, their exoskeletons displaying festive patterns of blue, purple, and gold, colors of celebration and alliance. Today was the official signing of the Earth-Niloria Treaty. After intense negotiations, both sides had reached an agreement that would benefit their civilizations for generations to come. Lee wore an improved version of his transparency suit. The Earth engineers had refined it based on Nilorian feedback, making the emotional displays more nuanced and responsive. It had become more than a diplomatic tool. It was now a symbol of the alliance itself. "Nervous?" asked Kang, who stood beside him. The Nilorian's exoskeleton displayed friendly blue patterns with hints of excitement. "A little," Lee admitted, watching as his suit flickered with small orange spots that revealed his true feelings. "This is the most important treaty Earth has ever signed." "For Niloria as well," Kang replied. "No other species has ever found such a creative solution to our differences." In the 3 weeks since the Council had accepted his innovation, remarkable progress had been made. Earth would receive access to Nilorian mineral resources and advanced technology. In exchange, Niloria would benefit from human agricultural methods and artistic traditions. But perhaps most valuable was the cultural exchange that had already begun. Several Nilorians in the crowd wore decorative transparent elements inspired by Lee's suit, not for privacy, but as a tribute to the new alliance. Meanwhile, a delegation of Earth scientists had arrived wearing sensor-equipped garments that displayed their emotional states through color patterns. Sub-Chancellor Park approached, her exoskeleton gleaming with formal patterns. "It is time, Commander Lee." Lee nodded and followed her to the central platform where the High Council waited. Counselor Min stood at the center, holding a crystal tablet containing the treaty text. "Today marks a historic moment," Min announced, her voice carrying through the hall. "Two species, different in body and custom, join in common purpose." The crowd of Nilorians responded with a wave of bright color changes, their form of applause. 3 weeks ago, we faced an impasse that threatened to prevent this alliance, Min continued. Where traditional thinking saw only conflict between our needs for transparency and human needs for covering, Commander Lee found harmony. Lee's suit displayed modest green patterns of pride mixed with humility. He had learned to appreciate how the suit prevented him from hiding his true feelings, an initially uncomfortable experience that had become strangely freeing. "The treaty before us today is more than an exchange of resources," Min said. "It is a commitment to understanding differences as opportunities rather than obstacles."